My stepsister planned to secretly marry my fiancé by impersonating me for a foreign visa. My name is Fiona Parker, and I have decided to share the complete, unabridged story of how my stepsister attempted to steal my identity and secretly marry my fiancé in order to obtain a visa to another country. I will tell it in my own words, from beginning to end, carefully detailing the events and emotions. I will not use any parentheses or special formatting. This account is long, for I believe it is important to show every stage of betrayal and every subtle sign that I initially missed. By the end, I hope you will see how easily someone you trust can upend your life when driven by desperation or ambition. This is a cautionary tale about family, love, and the power of forging your own identity in the face of deception. I grew up in a medium-sized city on the West Coast. My mother, Linda, and my father, Gregory, divorced when I was around 8 years old. The separation was not the worst, but it left me a bit uncertain. For a couple of years, it was just me and my mother in a small apartment, my father living across town. Then he met someone new, a woman named Susan, who had a daughter from a prior marriage. That daughter was my soon-to-be stepsister, Jill. At first, it felt like a normal scenario where father introduced me to his new partner. Jill was a bit older than me by 2 years, and we met on a casual weekend. I was 10, Jill was 12. She seemed friendly enough. They eventually married, making Jill my official stepsister. She and Susan moved into my father's place, and I visited occasionally. Meanwhile, I continued living with my mother, so I did not share a daily life with Jill. My father tried to keep me in the loop, telling me Jill was adjusting, that Susan was kind. I accepted that at face value, not anticipating how Jill and I would collide in the future. I saw Jill on weekends or holidays, when I'd stay at my father's house. She was polite but never warm. I sometimes felt an undercurrent of competitiveness in Jill. If father praised me for good grades, Jill might roll her eyes or find a way to highlight her own accomplishments. Still, I wanted a sisterly bond, so I tried to be kind. However, father did not push us to be super close, so we remained acquaintances more than sisters, tolerating each other. Meanwhile, father started traveling more for business, leaving Jill and Susan to manage the household. My mother had her own life, eventually remarrying. I finished high school, then moved out of my mother's place to attend college in another state. Jill, slightly older, had already left for an overseas program. That meant for several years, Jill and I barely interacted, only exchanging the occasional greeting if we both visited father at the same time. She studied something abroad, I was told, possibly design or marketing. I never knew precisely. We never formed a deep bond, so I did not follow her life closely. I was 23, fresh out of college, when I returned to my hometown for a job. I decided to live in a small studio near the city center, while father remained in the suburbs with Susan. Jill had returned from abroad at that point, so she was back living with them, apparently job hunting. We had some dinners as a family, just father, Susan, me, and Jill sitting around a table, making awkward small talk. Jill boasted about her experiences overseas, how she wanted to move back abroad one day, that she disliked living here. Father often told Jill she should find a stable job first. She responded that she had big ambitions, but needed the right opportunity. I said little, but father told me privately that Jill was restless, searching for a big break. It did not concern me much. At the time, I had my own focus, building my career in communications. I never suspected that Jill's hunger for an international life would lead her to try stealing my place. My fiancé. About a year later, I met Ryan. He was introduced by a coworker and we clicked from the start. Ryan was a gentle, intelligent man who worked as a software engineer. He had dual citizenship in the United States and a European country, since his mother was American and his father was European. He lived in my city for his job, but he occasionally traveled to Europe to visit relatives. We dated, found we shared many values, and quickly fell in love. It was the sweetest, happiest romance I had ever experienced. When father and Susan discovered I was serious with someone, they invited us for dinner. Jill was present. That night, Jill asked Ryan a flurry of questions about which European country he had citizenship in, how the visa process worked, whether it was easy to live in that other place. Ryan politely answered, maybe found Jill's curiosity a bit odd, but we brushed it off. I recall Jill's eyes lighting up whenever Ryan mentioned his father's side of the family overseas. At the time, I found it curious but not alarming. As Ryan and I progressed in our relationship, we realized we were truly compatible. After about a year of dating, he proposed. It was a heartfelt moment near a lake at sunset, a memory I still treasure. I said yes, tears in my eyes. We decided on a wedding date about 8 months later. My father, mother, and stepmother congratulated me. Jill seemed enthusiastic, telling me how wonderful it was that I'd marry a man with international ties. I found it somewhat amusing how she fixated on that detail, but I was too happy to dwell on it. We started planning the wedding, setting a date for the following summer, renting a venue by the coast. Meanwhile, Jill remained jobless or drifting between short gigs, complaining that no one recognized her overseas qualifications. Father sometimes gave her money. She occasionally asked me if Ryan could help her get a job in his father's country. I said I'd mention it, but it was not so simple. She kept pressing me, but I politely evaded. 3 months before my wedding, Ryan and I decided to buy a small home. We found a lovely townhouse in a quiet neighborhood. We planned to finalize the mortgage soon. Jill seemed fascinated, offering to help us settle in. She visited the house once, praising its layout, peppering Ryan with more questions about his plans to travel after the wedding, how soon I might move abroad with him. I told Jill we had no immediate plan to relocate, but maybe in the future we'd consider living partly in Europe. She seemed disappointed. Something about her manner gave me a slight chill, but I told myself I was being paranoid. As the wedding approached, I threw myself into final details. The dress, the guest list, the flowers. Ryan was busy with work. Jill offered to do errands for me, but I'd never felt close enough to trust her. Still, Father said I should let Jill help, that it might bond us. I gave her a couple of tasks, like picking up decorations, which she handled fine. Meanwhile, I realized Ryan was receiving more direct messages from Jill, asking him about visa processes, what documents might be needed to live in his father's country. Ryan told me he answered briefly but found it odd. He told me about it. I said Jill was probably just curious. Neither of us saw the bigger plot. A few weeks before the wedding, Jill told me she might have found a new life overseas, but needed a fiancé or spouse from that country to secure a spousal visa. I joked that maybe she should date one of Ryan's European friends. She gave me a strange smile, saying, or maybe I'll find a faster route. I laughed it off, not thinking she was serious. The next day, Father told me Jill was complaining she could not stand living here and was desperate to return abroad. I saw a pattern but did not connect the dots fully. I was too focused on wedding stress. A few days before the ceremony, everything seemed normal on the surface, though I'd had minor conflicts with Father about the guest list. Jill volunteered to manage some final tasks. I let her handle the printing of name cards and a few leftover chores. Then, one evening, I left my phone on the dining table while I showered. When I returned, I saw my phone had a notification for an email from the wedding officiant, but it was marked as read. Puzzled, I opened it. The officiant had sent a reminder about verifying identity documents for the bride and groom. My confusion grew. I asked Ryan if he had read my phone. He said no. Then I suspected Jill might have been snooping if she was around. But Jill had not been there. I dismissed it as me accidentally hitting read. However, something felt off. Ryan checked his email and found a similar reminder about ID checks. 2 days before the wedding, Father hosted a small family dinner at his house. Ryan and I attended along with mother, stepmother, Jill, and a few relatives. Everything felt cordial. Jill kept smiling at me strangely. That night, Father insisted we all toast to my upcoming marriage. Jill left the table early, claiming a headache. Ryan and I parted soon after. I slept fitfully, uneasy but without a clear reason. The next day, the wedding rehearsal was scheduled at the venue, with the ceremony the following morning. I woke up excited. Ryan and I planned to drive there, finalize details, run through the service with the officiant, plus a small dinner for the wedding party. Jill was set to come as a bridesmaid. Everything was on track. While I was preparing to leave, I got a call from my mother, sounding frantic. She said father and stepmother called her, saying I was apparently not needed at the rehearsal, that I'd changed something about the ceremony's schedule. Alarm bells rang in my head. I told Mother I had no idea what they were talking about. I tried calling Father, but got no answer. I tried Jill, no response. Then Ryan called me, saying the officiant had texted him, confused about contradictory instructions. He said the officiant wanted to confirm if the bride was arriving alone. Ryan and I looked at each other, baffled. We decided to rush to the venue, ignoring any weird messages. On the drive, we speculated that maybe Jill or Father was messing up the schedule. We arrived at the venue. The officiant approached us, looking relieved. He told us someone identifying herself as the bride had arrived earlier, with Father and stepmother, wanting to do the final ID check and sign certain papers. The officiant had grown suspicious because the woman seemed older, wearing sunglasses and acting evasive. She claimed the groom would arrive separately. The officiant demanded ID, which the woman said she'd left in the car. Then Father apparently asked the officiant to skip the usual checks, saying time was short. The officiant refused, saying the law required verifying the bride's identity. Then the group had left hurriedly. Ryan and I were stunned. The officiant said maybe it was a misunderstanding. We realized in horror that Jill might have tried to pass herself off as me. But Jill was younger than me by 2 years. How could she appear older? Then it hit me that Jill might have changed her hair or used heavy makeup. Our minds whirled. We told the officiant we had no idea what was happening. He told us not to worry, that we were obviously the genuine couple. He said he would not let anyone sign in place of me. We tried calling Father again, no answer. We called Mother, who repeated what Father told her, that the bride was handling a separate rehearsal. This was madness. We quickly realized Jill must have arranged a scheme with Father and stepmother to marry Ryan in my place. Possibly Father believed Jill was me. Or Father might be in on it, wanting Jill to gain a spousal visa through Ryan's dual citizenship. We felt ill, not sure who was behind which part. Regardless, we resolved that we had to block any attempt at forging a wedding. We decided we would stick to the real rehearsal that afternoon, with our actual guests. Meanwhile, we told the officiant to require my official ID tomorrow. The officiant agreed wholeheartedly. Then we tried to gather more info. We phoned Father, who finally picked up. He sounded nervous, telling me not to be rash. I demanded an explanation. He said maybe the wedding arrangement had changed. I screamed that I was the bride, not Jill. Father said Jill deserved a chance to go abroad, that she needed Ryan's citizenship. I felt my stomach churn. I asked Father if he had lost his mind. He insisted it was for Jill's future, and that I'd find another fiancé eventually. I hung up, shaking with rage. Ryan was equally furious. We suspected that Jill had told Father some story about me being willing to relinquish Ryan so she could marry him for a visa. It was unthinkable, but Father had never truly known Ryan well. Maybe Jill tricked Father. Or maybe Father was complicit, deciding Jill's interests were more important than mine. In any case, we recognized a direct attempt to impersonate me at my own wedding. I stared at Ryan, tears welling, worried that tomorrow's ceremony would be sabotaged. He hugged me, promising that no one would replace me, that he would not be fooled. I calmed slightly, telling the officiant we might have drama in the morning, to watch out for Father or Jill. He nodded, reaffirming he would require me to present my ID, the groom to present his, and that no changes were possible unless we both consented. We breathed relief, one layer of protection. We also posted a quick update on social media for friends attending, clarifying the official rehearsal time and place, so no one would be misled by Father or Jill. That done, we returned home, hoping the next day would still be ours. I barely slept, haunted by the thought of Jill trying to appear as me. My father, stepmother, and Jill had never shown such blatant disregard for my life. Yet now they were effectively stealing my fiancé so Jill could get a foreign visa. Morning arrived. Ryan and I got dressed, me in my white gown, him in his suit, each accompanied by supportive friends, ignoring Father altogether. We arrived at the venue, found the officiant waiting, along with my mother, some dear friends, and a few guests. Father was absent, stepmother absent, Jill absent. My mother, seeing my distress, told me I'd do fine, that father had lost his moral compass if he truly sided with Jill. The officiant double-checked my ID, Ryan's ID, got everything set. We proceeded with the ceremony, half expecting a chaotic entrance from Jill. But none came. We exchanged vows, said I do, shared a tearful kiss, officially husband and wife. The guests applauded. My mother cried. My father was nowhere to be seen. We breathed relief that no insane interruption occurred. When the ceremony ended, we moved to a small reception area. Our friends congratulated us. Some asked about father. I tried to mask heartbreak, telling them father had an emergency. We enjoyed the reception, cutting the cake, dancing. Then, about halfway through, father, stepmother, and Jill arrived, looking furious. Jill wore a white dress, not as fancy as mine, but obviously chosen to mimic a bride. They tried to demand the officiant redo the ceremony. The officiant refused, telling them the wedding was already concluded with the real bride and groom. Jill began shouting that I had stolen her chance. I retorted that it was my fiancé, my ceremony, that she was insane. Father scolded me, claiming I was selfish for not letting Jill have the marriage. He insisted Jill needed Ryan's citizenship. Ryan stepped forward, telling them all to leave or security would be called. Jill screamed that I was a traitor. Father glared. Stepmother ranted. My mother and friends stepped in, ushering them out, telling them they had no right to sabotage. Eventually, they left in a huff, father calling me ungrateful. I was trembling but had the support of the crowd. The reception resumed after that bizarre interruption. Ryan and I tried to salvage the mood. Our guests offered comfort. We overcame the shock enough to continue the celebration. In the days that followed, father and Jill tried to spin a story that I had promised Jill the chance to marry Ryan. It was absurd. I told them I would never speak to them again unless they apologized. They refused, doubling down on the idea that Jill deserved a visa. My mother was disgusted by father's betrayal. She told me to cut them off. Meanwhile, Jill posted all sorts of nonsense on social media, claiming I had stolen her fiancé. People who knew the truth sided with me. Others watched in confusion. Ryan and I blocked them from contacting us. We moved forward with our life as newlyweds. Father made no attempt to reconcile, presumably siding with Jill's delusions. Over time, I found acceptance that father was lost to me. Jill apparently continued seeking another man from that country, but her reputation was tarnished. I'd reflect on how close Jill came to impersonating me at my own wedding. If the officiant had been less diligent, if we had not shown up in time, or if father had more cunning resources, I might have faced an even bigger scandal. But I was grateful the officiant insisted on ID checks, that we had real friends who came to witness. Jill's twisted plan for a foreign visa fell apart in humiliating style. Though father severed ties, I found solace in my new marriage, building a stable life with Ryan, unconcerned with father's manipulations. I never saw father again, nor Jill, nor stepmother. I learned that sometimes, even family can betray you in unimaginable ways for personal gain. Through heartbreak, I discovered the resilience to choose my happiness, to stand firm in my identity, and not let anyone impersonate me or steal my future. That is my story, told in detail, recounted from my own point of view, explaining how my stepsister tried to impersonate me on my wedding day to marry my fiancé for a foreign visa, only to fail when confronted by the truth. May it serve as a cautionary tale to others who might sense a sibling's envy or ambition overshadowing their sense of decency. My name is Fiona Parker, and that is how I survived my stepsister's brazen attempt at stealing my marriage.